And I got to tell you, something just popped in my head, and it's not on our run sheet here, so I'm not trying to shoot or throw a curveball in, but this just popped into my head. With that lead up to Barely Legal, the ECW WWF, relationship that Vince had with Paul Heyman at the time came into a major play because Paul was able to work his way on the Monday Night Raw and have the, quote, first ever ECW invasion. But I look at that on paper. I see Sabu, I see Taz, I see Raven, I see the Sandman, I see the Dudley Boys, I see Mikey Whipwreck, I see the BWO and Nunzio. I see all these ECW mainstays, but the franchise was not in attendance. Now, with that, were you in support of that at all, or were you just balking at it and be like, no, I want nothing to do with that relationship?
No, I balked at it. I was in the studio when Paul spoke to Vince. Paul the whole time's like holding his fingers up to his lips, like, shh, don't say it, don't, because he was on speakerphone. And when he first pitched the idea, and I had been telling Paul for some time before this. This was after the fact that I had heard Vince's voice when he called the studio that day, that I talked about before in a previous episode.
Right.
And I told him, I said, at some point, maybe not now, but as soon as that son of a bitch has to stab you in the back, he will. And he sure as hell did. But Paul was on the phone with Vince, and they were talking this whole thing through. And I already told Paul, there is no chance in hell of me going there. Done. Not happening. You can fire me if you want, but I'm not going. And Vince said to Paul on the phone, now he thinks he's talking to Paul, doesn't realize that I'm sitting there listening, and so was Joey Styles, and I think Francine was there. And Vince said to Paul, what about the franchise? And Paul said, I don't think you want the franchise there. I'd rather him not be there. And Vince insisted. He said, no, he's your top star. You have to have him there. And Paul stood up to him and said, trust me, Vince, you really don't want Shane to be there. And Vince said to Paul, and this will show you a mindset in the way he thinks of his talent. He said, well, you don't think you can just tell him to be there? And I forget the exact wording, but it was like along those lines, like, you just tell him he's going to be there. And Paul said back to him, I don't talk to my talent that way. And that was how it got dropped. And, Paul left it with saying, trust me when I tell you, you'd rather not have the franchise there. And if Vince, and I'm sure you don't listen to this podcast, but I'm sure he has stooges that does, trust me when I tell you, Vince, it was in your best interest in not having me there that night. I had no want to be part of that. I'd already been there. I knew what a goddamn quagmire it was, and how aimless it was. When I look back and you see like how Steve Austin went in there, with the ringmaster gimmick, and and just went nowhere, and suddenly he's given the opportunity to show his wares, what Steve Austin brings to the table, what tools Steve Austin brings. And, the rest, as they say, is wrestling history, right? It just is what it is. And sometimes some guys may need you to direct for them. Somebody like a Steve Austin or a Shane Douglas or a Mick Foley or a Mark Callis or a Bret Hart, go on down the list, are not people that need to direct them. Just give them the outlet and point them in a direction. So when they did the invasion angle, I sat and watched that from my house, and I was happy for my ECW brothers to be on there and doing that, because at the time it was really cool and sort of cutting edge. But in the back of my head, I knew that at some point there was going to be a price to pay for this. And, I'm thankful to this day that I was not part of that invasion angle.